Well, it's 7 o'clock, and I think I'm going to just talk about the bookstore for a minute while I give whoever is left to sign in. I know that there's going to be a number of other people coming in. We've got several people on the line right now, but I figured I'd start to talk about life at the bookstore, what it is, what we're doing, what the fall looks like, and take a few minutes to do that so that people can kind of get themselves signed in and acclimated. They did get a reminder email, so people do know that this is happening, but I know some people are not very familiar with Zoom. So it may take them a little while to figure out that they have to download the app and do all that stuff. The bookstore is in hybrid mode. We started out completely shut down with curbside pickup with a bin outside the door. We upped our online presence pretty quickly and did quite a number. We segued basically into almost completely online orders. I'm lucky enough that I live in the same building as the bookstore, so sheltering in place for me was going downstairs. I would go downstairs, I'd answer the phone as much as I could, answer emails as much as I could, fill orders as much as I could, and on nice days we left the books out and told people. So we started out very restrictive for very good reasons and moved our way into partially opening. The front half of the store is open to 3 people or 1 family group with a mask. And we still do quite a bit of curbside pickup, and we now have touchless payment options in the store, so people do come in, but we still get a lot of phone and internet orders. And I'm grateful for the American Booksellers Association that they upped our website and waived the fees and made it possible. And Stephen and I have just pretty much been doing 10 and 12-hour days trying to keep up. It's just started to slow down this week because I think people are ramping up for school. And so we're looking to how to best have a formula for the fall, because, and I'll tell anybody here that is within earshot, if you have not thought about the holidays by Halloween and ordered within a week after that, you may not get it, no matter what it is. Because the UPS man says it's like Christmas with no help right now. And it's going to get to be 2 or 3 times more active. But also the supply chain in the book world is very weird. I mean, I can't get copies of some really basic titles. I think, something like, some real classics you just can't get because the printer, about 2/5 of the printers are down. So getting replenishment is difficult. Getting some new books is difficult. I mean, it's going to get worse from that standpoint. And yet what's better is that when we were all at our worst, Amazon wasn't fulfilling books and the library was closed and we were the only game in town, and a lot of those customers stayed with us. So that part of this has really caused people, not just in book world, but in all the world, to refocus on what's meaningful to them. And I'm eternally grateful that I'm on that list. Our bookstore is on that list, and bookstores in general, small businesses, the toy store next door, the gift shop, all of that. So there is the good news, if there can be any in all of this, is that people have had that interior time to kind of go, I really want that toy store to succeed, or that bookshop, or whatever. And so that's good. I mean, people are really have by and large made an effort. And so that's where we stand. If people want children's books, they're escorted one at a time to the back of the room. We switched it around so that it goes across instead of on the side. And so you can't get past a certain point, or that you can't go into the kids section unless you're escorted there, because too many little 3-year-old hands. But what I was just telling David and Amy and Jonathan before all of you signed on is that Steve and I realized that we really missed poetry. And so this is what I said to David earlier, a noble experiment to see if we can get the feeling from poetry in a Zoom event, but at least gather to honor the craft, because it's really important that we hear poetry. So thank you all. I am going to post the poetry website that I have on my homepage for Byrd's Books, and that's where all of the books from these three poets are listed. So I will post it again at the end, but if you want to look at the page and you want to see examples of some of the books that we're talking about tonight, there's a place that you can go. So I want to thank Amy Nawrocki and Jonathan Andersen and David Leff for being with us tonight, and thank you all for joining us. We're going to ask each poet to read some of their work for about 10, just shy of 15, about 10 minutes or so. Then I will introduce the second and the third poet as we go along. And then at the very end, we'll do a round robin where each poet reads one poem. So that seems to be a nice way to wrap it up and kind of close out the evening. So I think what we're going to do, and we talked about starting with Amy. For those of you who don't know Amy Nawrocki is a Connecticut native raised in Newtown and now living in Hamden. She earned a bachelor's degree from Sarah Lawrence College and a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Arkansas. She has received numerous honors for her poetry, including awards from the Litchfield Review Poetry Contest, the Codhill Chapbook competition, the Loft Anthology, Phi Kappa Phi, New Millennium Writings, and the Connecticut Poetry Society. She is the author of 5 poetry collections: Potato Eaters, Nomad's End, Lune de Miel, 4 Blue Eggs, and Reconnaissance. With her husband, Eric D. Lehman, she wrote A History of Connecticut Wine, A History of Connecticut Food, and Literary Connecticut. She teaches English and creative writing at the University of Bridgeport and is the mother to 2 cats, Maple and Django. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Alice. Just let me know if you can't hear me well enough.
Okay.
And I'll do my best.
Oh, can I make one more note?
Please.
If any of you would like a continuing dialogue, at the bottom, if for those of you not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of your screen is a little icon. Take your cursor down there and it says chat. Just discuss what you want in the chat field if you want to say anything. You know, so I just wanted to invite you to do that. Sorry, Amy.
No, thank you. All right, I am going to start with a poem from my collection, Reconnaissance. And Reconnaissance is a collection that really is inspired by looking for material, of course, but just examining the world closely as possible for inspiration. And this poem is kind of how I got into that. The Thief. I apprenticed well. For a 6th grade project, Mrs. Montecavo taught me the worth of a good forgery when she assigned a footnoted history of a painter and encouraged an attempt at imitation. Seeing Monet's Westminster Bridge reprinted in Reader's Digest, I modeled my own with schoolgirl brushes and an aptitude for blending. I typed his biography on a blue Remington, stenciled the title page, punched symmetrical holes and glued the masterpiece into a pocketed folder. I never got the stink of acrylic off my fingers. Audacity and small victories, these are gateways for any scavenger. Once one is secure in the flat of a false horizon, transformations are easy, an open book, so to speak. I pocketed the collected poems of E.E. Cummings wholesale, tore the barcode from the last page and slipped its frayed spine between loose leaf sheets of unlined but perforated pages of a notebook. Long after, the card catalog entry went away too. Like other trophies, I just stored it, held it in a box of pressed flowers and half-memorized poems, among generous piles of pens and paintbrushes, newspaper clippings and dirty love letters scribbled on the backs of postcards. For these corruptions, I've paid only in calluses and broken pencil tips. Despite my best calligraphy, slippery pens have crossed out entire lines, carefully typeset in linotype and Century schoolbook, my marks bleeding through pages now unreadable. In the gray between homage and sacrilege, I thieve too much. Red wheelbarrows pile full of leaves and dirt and burnable logs pressed into the pulp of scrap paper or woven into stretchable canvases. Little I see in nature that is my own. I stole Van Gogh's sunflower and painted it on my shoulder. Like Olympia, I learned how to stare. Next time, let me mimic the syntax of bridges and throw sand over wet, stolen ink. Let me trust in surveillance. Once the thief learns to discern original from run-of-the-mill, everything is a first edition. Everything is one of a kind. I'm going to go back to my collection for Blue Eggs for a couple of poems. And I'm sure everybody's been thinking about isolation, maybe living it as well as thinking about it. So I'm going to read a poem about a solitary life, not isolation necessarily. The poem was inspired and takes the voice of a woman I met years ago while Eric, my husband, and I were hiking on Cape Cod. We were hiking on the beach, and we were walking across the dunes, and a woman called to us from a door in one of the shacks that still exists and you can still rent out. She had won had won the lottery for a residency. She was a visual artist, and we spoke with her a couple minutes. But this is a poem for her. Her name is Laura. I can't remember her last name. The poem's title comes from a line from Walden by Henry David Thoreau. Did I get that right, David? I've always said Thoreau, so forgive me, David and Henry. A great deal of company. After the storm, the loneliness does not evaporate. A half-day trek to the shingled cottage through dunes ripe with coyote tracks and unfriendly dwarf pines means another week in isolation, and the acrid smell of turpentine, only the acrid smell of turpentine to argue with. Even when the sun in its naked, unforgiving callousness ventures out again, holes in the atmosphere remain. Could be worse. A fourth trapped mouse rumors to be still alive behind the shack, and the ghosts of bums and poets ricochet around the creaky loft. These, anyway, are voices, consolation for the blank canvas in front of her. A still life of bold fruit decays in the charcoal of her mind. First, the brush must dip itself into the clear water where the muses bathe, but the well coughs up only the red iron of earth. Once the mottled conglomerates of sunset arrive, dinner is made. The wood stove sparks against a damp log. The unswept floor calls for a broom, and the burdens of idleness finally exhaust her. She dunks dry bristles into wet, sandy paint, spreads black onto white, and forges a scene. Two stick figures, walking in the terrestrial moonscape of dune summer. A blue crescent of water loops off the feathered page, blurs past beach grass to the deep, ample surf, its shores crowded with the blinking eyes of sea gazers, each with gravity's sadness salted to one brush tip. So from solitary to a world full of activity and noise and wonderful things to be part of. This is also from Four Blue Eggs. This poem is called There Are People in the World. There are people in the world, I'm sure of that. Seen with their comings and goings, umbrellas, raincoats, decorated with black buttons, and the long belt that loses its way out of one loop, nearly dragging on the ground. These people I know, appearing in the long shot of a movie, exterior train station, doors opening and closing with magnetic pull. They're standing clear, sidestepping the train's brutal electricity and its indigo machinery. There are machines too, I'm sure of that. Inventions clean and useful, gears, trapezoids, unfathomable windmills in faraway places, put there by men's curious hands. The systems hatched from brains piquant and bloody. The train's careful maze of nerve endings, synapses, brakes, and rotors, tendons of its apparatus. In briefcases and tailored purses, the people and their inventions mold this dingy world. They carry metal philosophies, jagged pieces of technology, gadgets, watches, cell phones, doodads to tinker and try out, music and messages packed into files, accessible, tremulous. The shoelace, keeping the shoe in place, the shoe that eases the foot down onto the heavy pavement. Which do I prefer? The categories of people sandwiched into their compartments, or their progress that makes the train, the clock, the rails, the beams and sinuous bricks bellow in synchronicity? The track or the engineer? The raincoat or the seamstress? The ticket or the conductor punching my ticket, selling the fare, his face sandblasted, chiseled, aching to tell me its ingenuity. I wanted a poem that had life in it. So that's, there are people in the world. And there are, and thank you for joining us tonight on your crazy devices. Okay. I'm gonna read the remaining poems from my latest collection. It's called Mouth Brooders. Here we go. The Failure of Bookmarks. That's not the title of my poem, but just a note to myself. I had my pages all penciled in. Circumstance. Even the expert needs a tripod to hold the horizon in the viewfinder of a camera. And it's true, the acrobat finds a still point to spin into and hold off the chaos of tumbling. Envying the savant lives of stationary window blinds, a broken girl stakes out patterns in parquet floorboards to prove she is not broken. She wants to quell vertigo as certainly as a guillotine slicing the perpendicular. This is a poem about, it was inspired by a hike I took to Westbrook, which is, I live in Hamden, this is nearby. And well, you'll hear about the birds. It's called Ravens of West Rock. Along the ridge, the old Baldwin Parkway lays the augury of lost asphalt. But I trek over the nearby trail, preferring the variability of stepping stones and scrub oaks, forgoing the straight path of buzzing mosquitoes for the low chuckle of unseen birds. Unknowingly, I turn them into grouse or turkey, then predict crow forms, unaccustomed to the throaty, mechanical gurgle of these new calls. Ears betray them before eyes do. Emerging from the blazes, I see their outlines, stenciled on the high tension wires, scanning the valley and screaming at my intrusion. Big as hawks, burly as storks, they circle, landing with deliberation on iron trees. In my feet, I feel their cronks and craw, craw, craw vibrate and unsettle the cloudless sky. I follow their cries with my eyes. I want to distinguish them from others, prove my ornithology, to understand the echo of black and the vision of voices tactile in their cacophony. As I watch, they turn into metaphors, witches whose wings signal the purple of bruises, demons kin, fit for Gothic poems and graveyards. The nest is nearby. The mother is angry. Spells are cast. They are, after all, soul devourers who tear me apart with their darkness, who send me back to the forest wanting evermore to be one of them. This poem is, I wrote it for my sister, but I'm reading it tonight to honor all the haircuts that we've all had to endure, enjoy, practice. That my lovely do is courtesy of my husband, Eric, and I've actually been better at his short hair than, well, he did a pretty good job. But anyway, I'm sure everybody has had to try to manage hair in a time of crisis. So, like we should be managing hair in a time of crisis, but nevertheless, haircuts. Maybe we asked for it. Maybe it was parents' idea. The shears in dad's box, suitable for brothers' buzzes and sideburn trims, so good enough for girls. In the two photos that survived, stuck between some summer album's pages, our faces glowed in the camera's flash, framed by the checkered red barber's cape and our long, dirty blonde hair. You went first and ended up with a tolerable bob. I learned that short hair and cowlicks don't look so good on girls who never bother with hair dryers. When we split from our twin beds and wandered 2 years apart into high school, I used to sneak downstairs to your room, listen to Joe Jackson and Genesis on your turntable, pretend to tolerate my feathered mess, and primp in the mirror of our grandmother's vanity. I got a perm, and you got in trouble for dyeing your hair, stealing back the gold locks of summer and tinting them platinum. I'm sorry I didn't sit next to you on the bus that morning when you lost driving privileges, forgoing the rusty Oldsmobile and its dragging muffler to suffer the bus. I'm sorry I never told you how cool you looked, like a movie star, like a big sister whose rebellious hair astonished me, a protective shell, like mother of pearl.
So that's about 15 minutes.
Okay, I'll say my last one for the
Does that work?
final round.
Yeah. Perfect. And I have with me Mouth Brooders, if you can see it one way or another, for those of you who may need to recognize a cover. And the other book I brought out with my copy of Comet's Tale. These are both by Amy. So there's some show and tell for you. Our next poet this evening, thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Our next poet this evening is Jonathan Anderson. Jonathan Anderson's other books include The Burden Note, Meridian Prize 2014, an English Serbo-Croatian chapbook, and Stomp and Sing, Curbstone Press, Northwestern University Press, 2005. He is the editor of the anthology Seeds of Fire, Contemporary Poetry from the Other USA, Smokestack Books. For 12 years, he was a high school English and special education teacher, and since 2008, he has been a professor of English at Quinebaug Valley Community College in Danielson and Willimantic, Connecticut. He and his wife, fellow writer and educator Denise Abercrombie, live in Storrs, Connecticut, with their two sons, Kit and Miles. And this is Jonathan's book, Augur. You can see the cover. Welcome, Jonathan. Where are you? There you are.
Here I am. Thank you, Alice, for organizing this and bringing us together. I'm going to begin with a poem in Augur. Actually, most of the poems I'll read this evening are in Augur. I'm going to begin with a still life, actually. I don't know if you can see this, but this is my subject.
Wow.
I don't always hold skulls up for my first introduction to the reading, but at the edge of the meadow, I duck under the great low sweeping hemlock boughs, enter night hiding at noon where a bloom of white resolves into you, the skull of a white-tailed buck. I pick you up, a little shocked at the parts we share, eye sockets, nasal cavity, incisors. You bear the skeleton of a veiny leaf, a coat of arms tattooed on top of your head. And I see now that you are not just one whole, but stitched together with fine, intricate lines, like cave drawings, once meaningful. I want to ask you how you lived, how you persisted as far as you could. Here, I want to tell you there are whole days I can barely stand up, never mind to run or turn to leap. And I would gladly trade my skull, this hard case of clustered storms, for your sleek contour, your fiercely driven nights, your one broken antler with which I would thrash and knock through the seasons that remain. Two poems here for my father, who passed away just about 8 years ago next week, which is kind of staggering to realize that was 8 years ago, his passing. The augur is not all about my father, but he is at the core of this book. The augurs were seers in ancient Rome, charged with kind of reading the natural signs and deciding whether or not it was propitious to launch a war fleet or hold a public ceremony. And it seems that we're living in very destabilized times, and I've found that a lot of my poems were kind of about trying to read the signs, like everyone else, kind of trying to figure out what's going on. And that's true of the poems, I think, in reflection about my father. This poem is called Criminintles. That word is spelled, as far as I can tell, Crymunintles, Criminintles. 2 mornings after declaring, glass of wine raised in firelight, that I would not write any more poems about my father, I slide open the barn door, squat down to replace the 3-decade-worn tines of the Troy-built M8, the 8 for 8 horsepower he bought with I still don't know what money. I tilt the tiller forward. It looks bowed in prayer. Each tine, hardened steel, hooked right or left like the business end of a scythe, comes off with the loosening of 2 bolts, falls and clatters, ringing briefly on the ground. I think I'll remember, but quickly lose the tricky offset pattern. 16 blades and 4 opposing gangs of 4 pointing toward and away from each other by turns. By the time I have them all replaced, lock nuts cranked down hard, anticipating years, the stall is filled with sun and the new tines gleam. I groan to stand and exclaim unthinkingly, "Criminentlies," startling myself with a word my father used to say. Its exact meaning I never thought to ask. It turns out that, well, that word is difficult to Google because, of course, you know, how do you spell it? I think maybe it's a close phonetic spelling, but it's a variation of, criminy or Jiminy Crickets, a kind of minced oath, you know, that my father also said. This is 1976. Everything was as dirty as a car wash bathroom, and pop tops cut the light littering the sides of US Route 1. In those days, still a long path of concrete sections we kathunked along in our Galaxy 500, my father driving, a sweat-stained halo burned into the upholstery above his curly head. I had no idea that 58,000 moms waited each day for their sons to ring the doorbell, and millions more moms stood staring at trailheads disappearing into mists and jungle in a land way, way, way beyond where I, standing at the tip of the jetty at the town beach, could see Long Island Sound become sky. I did nearly have my toes run over at the pharmacy comic book rack when the top half of a guy pushed by me with his wheelchair. Did he watch Ironside too? My mom sang like the angel Dad wasn't. Their laughs said, "I love you," to each other. And when she finally kicked me and my brother out of the house on Saturday morning, Dad's Spec 5 army patches sewn to our shirts, we would land on a lawn filled with trees filled with birds, chickadees and bob whites, red-winged and regular old blackbirds, grackles and crows. My brother waved his little flag for all the birds to see, and I worked the stick end of mine hard to scratch the chicken pox deep inside the plaster cast covering my right arm. We believed, not in anything, but in everything so far. Each day seemed to last a couple hundred years. This poem is based just on a brief observation of driving in Willimantic. My wife and I lived there for many years. I think there's not much you have to know. One note is I mentioned a Miltonic sonnet. This poem isn't a Miltonic sonnet, but I mentioned a Miltonic sonnet, which is a kind of sonnet practiced by John Milton, the 17th century poet. We think of sonnets as being love poems, but sonnets also, especially in Milton's hands, were forms where one could engage in philosophical and political and big questions. This is driving on Valley Street Wednesday morning. She stands on the sidewalk, bowing as is and in her habit to greet each little bobbing backpack sent to her one by the crossing guard on the other side, who moves as if he were pushing a succession of small boats across a wide and shallow strait. I slow, coast closer, stop. She nods to me, her face wrinkled, full of morning light and light all her own. I watch her high-five one boy who leaps to slap her palm. She fakes out another, pulling her hand back quickly to her wimple, like a cool dude slicking back his hair. Mock ignores a delighted little girl, the last to scamper across, who then turns to run, grinning, up the steps into St. Mary, St. Joseph School. Driving away, warmth spreading in my chest, I forgive this woman all her delusions, as she would, I am sure, forgive me mine if she could. I should write her a sonnet, Miltonic, I think, in which she comforts and romps with children who need her, whom she needs, and in the final line, I'll rhyme her with fun. Sonnet for a Nun. The 3-year-old with swollen eyes, burned feet. The man who stares unseeing at the hill all day. The shelter locker crammed, no will, no one to be bequeathed the mess you emptied while the TV glared. One client's wheat brown hair, his look from which you turned, but still, yes, let touch you late some nights full of ragged snores, whimpering, impure heat. And now that 3-year-old again, killed, raped, in that order, they believe. You sing songs of giggly beans to Lily. Trauma's night-long spray and morning ricochet can't make you stop your happy dances. These shotgunned lives, I believe, you know we each get one. A few years ago, my wife and I, Denise and I, love to walk. We do a lot of walking together. It's one of our pleasures. She gets me out there. And we like to walk, the public land around Horse Barn Hill and Yukon. And we were committing John Keats's poem To Autumn to memory at that time. And also around that time, we were thinking a lot about police killings of innocent people. Philando Castile, Freddie Gray, I think were recent at that time. And these things aren't equal, right? Memorizing a beautiful romantic poem and thinking about the deadly racism and class oppression we see in the world around us sometimes. The poem is called The Bellatress. Belles lettres, fine writings. Bellatrices are writers or sometimes enthusiasts of belles lettres. The Bellatrix, Storrs, Connecticut. We walked down into this valley, and I swear, straight into Keats's To Autumn, where full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. I didn't write that way. There are quotes from Keats here, so the great lines, that's Keats, not me. All right. I listen to the words tumble like apples from your lips and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core. Your full lips again, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells, and the rosy-hued land darkens from the west. The poet, like us, walked to feel his blood, to pass through his breath hanging in the air. But you remind me that mellow fruitfulness, twined flowers, and last oozings, all the ripening towards death, burst forth loaded with his grief for the slaughter in St. Peter's field. Women and men, hands up high, run through with bayonets, trampled, crushed, a month before the harvest moon rose, the one that rises now, swollen, bright, as implicated as gathering swallows while workers fall. The Irish literary critic Tom Paulin believes and writes pretty convincingly that this great, beautiful poem of the English language, filled with nature and these images of life and death, were really in part fueled by Keats's grief and rage at the St. Peterloo massacre, which happened in August 1819. It's interesting. There are things beneath the surface. There are layers to everything if you peel them back. We're gonna have a tonal shift here. I won't say too much other than the title and the epigraph. The title is for venture capitalist, accountant, business executive, and Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, who successfully cut public spending by tapping the toxic Flint River for drinking water, thereby poisoning the children of the city of Flint. A curse. Epigraph here is by Donald Hall, who in an old issue of the North Dakota Quarterly was writing about the poems of Thomas McGrath, and he said, "Curse and invective are strangely missing from American poetry. For the most part, our poets are public lovers and private haters." And of course, the curse is a long-standing tradition in poetics. Here's the deal, Governor. I am willing to believe in an afterlife where you might find forgiveness if that afterlife first detains you, twitchy and confused, not adamantine chained, but encircled in industrial lot razor wire, where we will find you giving up, giving in to reach for the one glinting glass you get, chugging greedily the lead-steeped water, picturing your own ganglia dying off like galaxies, but needing to drink. I am willing to believe in an afterlife in which you are pardoned upon the millionth time you convulse to vomit, but can't. An afterlife in which you stare, frustrated, uncomprehendingly, at spreadsheet calculations of your wealth now gone. An afterlife in which you, red-faced, fatigued beyond belief, are sorry. Yes, I would be willing to abide redemption for you there, when your body burden, your toxic load has burned you across enough weeks to equal all the moments in the forevers of the once full blooming imaginations of every child you served the dark waters of Flint River here.
Jonathan, you want to take a break and read one more at the end? That's a good one
Sure.
to end on.
Thank you.
Oh, it's perfect. And I showed you a picture of Auger, so I have it on the link at the beginning of this feed as well. David Leff. David K. Leff is an essayist, Pushcart Prize nominated poet, and former Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection. He is the author of 5 nonfiction books, 3 volumes of poetry, and a novel in verse. In 2016-17, the National Park Service appointed him Poet in Residence for the New England National Scenic Trail. David's journals, correspondence, and other papers are archived at the University of Massachusetts Libraries in Amherst. He is the town historian and town meeting moderator of Canton, Connecticut, where he also served 26 years as a volunteer firefighter. David's work is available on his website, davidkleff.com. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you.
Oh, and David has a brand new book that no one has had a chance to see because we've been on lockdown. So this is David's new book. And this is the one that preceded it. So those are the 2 I list on my website on the Poets page. And then you can link to David's other books and Amy's and Jonathan's by linking their names. So thank you, David.
Well, thank you, Alice, for inviting us all. And thank you all for coming out. I feel like I'm playing that old game show, Hollywood Squares, you know. But I also want to say that the books that Alice showed you from Jonathan and Amy, I have all those books, and you should have them too. It's really a delight to read with 2 such wonderful poets, and just happy to be here. Thank you, Alice. I'm going to start with an homage to the season, and it's August. It's hot. Iris, I envy you having just put on a sweater or a jacket. I wish I could do the same. If I could, I'd probably take all my clothes off, but that wouldn't work too well on Zoom. At any rate, there's a lot of beautiful flowers out right now in this season, but not all beauty is beautiful in a way. This is called Subversive Flower. It's from my first collection called The Price of Water. Subversive Flower. Against August drowsy greenery, a magenta haze of loosestrife floods the river with waves of cool, delicious color that pools and settles in the swamps. A sea of flashy electric flower spires. Escape from its garden paradise, this pilgrim plant now devours the landscape with its relentless spread of seed and root. It suffocates wild rice, jewelweed, cattails, and bulrushes, leaving a sterile, radiant desert that evicts mallards and face-painted wood ducks, muskrats, marsh wrens, and long-legged least bitterns. Seduced by blooms of subversive beauty, traffic slows for a look and camera click that captures the pretty, coveted postcard color. We're traffickers in images mesmerizing us like our own reflections, caught in the wetland waters where loosestrife blooms. Now, COVID-19 has kept a lot of us indoors, and if you've gone to any hiking trails, at least around Connecticut, you find them crowded. So my wife and I decided we needed fresh air and exercise, and we needed a place to do it where there weren't many people. So we started going to ancient cemeteries. And, there weren't many people there, very few, and the residents are 6 feet under, so they're socially distant. And this is a new poem about that experience. It's called COVID-19 Cemetery Escape. Locked down, bottled up, a drive and solitary cemetery stroll seem good medicine to soothe a body hungry for air, busy a mind aching for expanse. Socially distant in space and time, I wander alone among silent stones and gnarly cedars, massaged by breezes and sunshine, soft spring grass underfoot. Below winged soul effigies or willow and urn carvings, I read names and dates, a roll call of lives lived and forgotten, save for stone. I stop short at the faded, time-darkened marble slab of Patty Guard, dead of smallpox at 37 in 1837, just after her 4 children, aged 17 years to 9 days. My breath is labored, shallow. Were kisses, shared meals, or an embrace fatal? Cold stone speaks 3 weeks of terror. Lorenzo, Thomas, George, an infant. The inscription seems to weep, but the tears are mine. Arms and legs heavy, anguish penetrating centuries to an age before face masks, vinyl gloves, and vaccines. Fear of handshakes, kisses, or hugs magnify distance in these COVID days. Time slows, taunts, thickens as shadow contagions of dread await medicine's next miracle. So another unusual happening as a result of the pandemic, and maybe this is a good thing, is the revival of drive-ins. Now, there are 3 in Connecticut, down from many in the 1950s and 1960s, but they're popping up all over in mall parking lots and church parking lots where outdoor movies are taking place. So this is a poem I wrote a few years ago about an abandoned drive-in, and I call it In the Cemetery of Dreams. I guess you got a transition, a different kind of cemetery here. Half its panels missing, the giant screen framed in rusting skeletal steel faces an audience of autumn olive thickets, tangled bittersweet and grapevine. Posts once uttering laughter, gunshots, and music have long lost their voice, and the block concession stand that scented dank summer evenings with popcorn and French fries is a crater of concrete chunks, wires, and pipes. Fords and Chevys hungering for dusk and flickering larger-than-life magic once crowded the gravel lot head to taillight. backseat cozy in footed pajamas with my sisters, we watched Disney's Dalmatians and Bond battling Goldfinger as Dad shushed our giggles. Wrapped around a leggy girl years later, I parked by the fence row of pines, barely noticing Yosterians wheedling. In this arena of illusion, I rode Dr. Zhivago's train, landed on a planet of apes where liberty lay ruined on a beach, eavesdropped on the Godfather's irrefutable offers, hopped to the happy world of Greece, fell prey to apocalypse in Nam. Soundtrack and Technicolor merged with moonlight, clicking crickets, and the tang of damp from a nearby swamp. Gazing dizzily at the battered blank expanse of white, I see Brando with puffed cheeks and dark suit. Dreams were playing like previews in this ruined Serengeti of imagination where hawks stare from broken light posts and sparrows and warblers flit through brush. The screen's a great occluded eye, staring vacantly, looking at me as I once looked at it, and still showing tonight are the only stars worth a wish. So another great plague of our country, of course, is racism, and has been for a long time. And with the recent death in Minnesota, a lot of Confederate statues of generals and soldiers are coming down from places of honor, as well they should be. But history is complicated. And in San Francisco, they pulled down a statue of Ulysses S. Grant, the man who brought the South to its knees and ended the Civil War and ended slavery. The man who, as president, did all he could to ruin the Ku Klux Klan. But again, history is complicated, and Grant very briefly owned an enslaved person, and his wife's family had a history of owning slaves. But few people know another aspect of Grant. Another aspect of his bravery is when he wrote his memoirs and saved his family. Mark Twain helped him get them published. This is called Last Siege. His cancer-rotted throat a rusted stovepipe from decades of stogies. General Grant sat on his porch, pouring memories into a yellow legal pad, while tourists gawked. Water was liquid fire, more caustic than wartime whiskey. Once shouting over snapping rifles and cannon thunder, his voice faded to a weak rasp and dissolved. First in war and last in finance, his family destitute from one business failure, marching after another, the man who bombarded Vicksburg into surrender and unleashed ferocious assaults at Shiloh now fought on the battlefield of his own shrunken body. Armed with a pen, he struggled to outflank death with supply lines of cash from a book whose last words would bugle taps. In a dark frock coat and black top hat, he marshaled thoughts like troops, with words as sharp and clear as military orders, verbs ready to charge in the jaws of, with bayonets fixed. Weakened and wasting, caught in the jaws of excruciating pain and a fog of morphine, strength must have come from distant days in brass buttons and blue. Tour of duty over, the agony ended a week before Grant became a casualty. Courage and tenacity saved a family with ink and paper as much as a nation with mini balls and artillery shells. Cauterized in memory is a triumphant warrior graciously refusing a sword at Appomattox, but the shriveled scribbler is forgotten. Few know who is buried in Grant's tomb. That's from my second poetry collection, Depth of Field. Lastly, I want to read about a new poem about a crisis that will end all others if we don't do something to solve it, and that is climate change. This poem is called Broken Rainbow. And it starts with an epigraph from Genesis, from the chapter about Noah. And the waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth. Broken rainbow. Rhythmic waves are my heartbeat, blood chemistry, pulse of breath. The pungent air scented with my own sweat. Moody and restive, like me, the sea rages and storms with fist-pounding breakers, relaxes in serene, flat calm. In thrall to water's relentless grasp for the shore, I recall we arose from the ocean. Now we call it back to us with warming respirations from boilers and engines, morphing crystal lace glaciers to rushing streams. Mountainous icebergs and ice caps of eternal winter dissolve in a saltwater sump. Once frozen worlds, now unlocked, swell ceaseless tides. And oceans rush to embrace will devour the land, crash over walls, drown jetties, swallow pavement structures, spiky green Spartina marshes and river mouths, make islands of conifer-covered mountains. No rainbow promise can save us. No ark is large enough. The sea eagerly takes us back, reclaims its ancient inland realms as we struggle for new buoyancy. Thank you.
Thank you, David. What I'd like to do is something we talked about at the very beginning, is do a round robin where Amy, Jonathan, then David each read a poem, and then we will say good evening. I have posted a link to our website where some of these books are available. I know some of you already have many of them, so I just wanted to make it available for some of you who might be curious. I have come to the conclusion that poetry does succeed on Zoom. Quite honestly, it has fed me, and I very much can't thank you enough. So I'm looking forward to Amy starting off another poem.
Great. Thank you so much, Alice. And I agree. I think this is quite necessary, and I'm very glad and honored to have participated. So thank you. The poem I'm going to read finally is called The Uncurtained Window. And it's about caring for beings, even when it looks like the care won't do any good. The Uncurtained Window. There are a few ways this could go. A Rorschach for the faithful. A settlement for the kind of universe that will hold believers and unbelievers both. And the Byrd that has crashed headlong into the uncurtained window. The impact was audible. Had the glass been less solid, the shattering would have left them both in shards. A spilled bird, downy, red-headed, male. The leaf bed below seems promising, soft, cushioned. There is no movement. Between believing and not believing, there are 5 careless minutes in which part of her has already buried his hollow bones, because she's done this before, seen mobility feather away into unanswerable dust, bent her knees and clasped hands around wounds that did not heal. Chipmunks carry on. A titmouse ignores the fallen. The litany begins. Is there a shoebox? Where is the eyedropper? Scissors to cut the fine mummy gauze? A toothpick splint? Between the time it takes to say, I hope, and let us undo these finished wishes, unnecessary hospitals build their own triage. A wing unfolds itself from broken. October breezes puff breath into miniature lungs. Legs hop to a steady tree branch, and flight, so unbearably faithless, begins anew. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. So good to see you all.
Thank you, Amy. Jonathan?
Yes, Alice, thank you for bringing us together tonight. Amy, David, I really enjoyed your fine poems. Alice mentioned that, you know, one of the impetuses for this is that we're all going through a very difficult time. I mean, we have these local catastrophes layered upon pandemic and environmental threats, existential threats of all kinds, social, economic, etc. And so it's a time for sustenance and resilience in community. So thank you, Alice. And I'm going to finish with this poem, I think, an attempt to be in that spirit. You must have a hope that will let you stomp and sing at any cold dawn. You must not wait to love the student who loves you and would like to kill you. You must read the story again and again to the child who receives you with a bovine stare. You must get up every day to punch in, not dreaming on transcendence, not desiring new heroes or gods, not looking the other way, but looking for the other way and ready to talk to everyone on the line. You must not wait for official approval nor general consensus to rage. You must come again to kneel in shiny rock-strewn soil, not to pray, but to plant. Yes, even now, as ice caps melt and blacktop goes soft in the sun, you must prepare for the harvest. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. David?
For my last poem, I'm going to read something from my novel in verse, The Breach, which Alice displayed earlier. And this is a story of a small New England mill town that loses its principal industry due to foreign competition and environmental contamination. Not an uncommon story, but what's different about this one is that it's narrated, it's told by various common objects in the community. Such as the clock in the church steeple, the coffee maker at the bank, you know, the candlesticks on the table. And I'm going to read about the umbrella that's in this story. It's an umbrella that is left at the bank, Mr. Cogswell's bank, by an English lord. And then it makes its way to other venues and discovers that Mr. Cogswell, the banker, is having an affair with one of the tellers. So this is called Gent's Walking Umbrella. Some call me promiscuous because I'll open to anyone for pedestrian shelter in a cloudburst. Compact as a perched raptor, I've suddenly burst forth like a bird taking flight, protecting whomever is in need. I could care less for what the negative nabobs of loose talk say. Handcrafted in London by James Ince and Sons Limited, makers of fine portable shelter since 1805. I've a black metal frame, gunmetal trim, a chestnut handle, and black fabric canopy. Fated to be misplaced, my kind are engaged in a nomadic existence, serial ownership. Starting with an English lord who called upon handlebar mustachioed Mr. Cogswell. I was forgotten at the Savings Society, witnessing many mortgages and commercial loans. Teller Ellen Bostwick borrowed me on a rainy afternoon, and I spent a month in her bedroom, where I blushed at occasional visits from Lord Easterbrook's banker friend, who seemed to delight in the lady's long legs and squealed quite exquisitely in ecstasy. On a stormy night, Mr. Cogswell borrowed me back, only to leave me a fortnight later in the barber shop, where I waited out many a sunny day in a corner listening to rather bold hirsute characters hold forth nastily on the factory's closing. Now I'm stranded behind the counter at the Night Owl Diner, patiently biding my time, my delicate fabric absorbing the greasy aroma of bacon and fried potatoes while listening to a surfeit of the most loudish talk. It's not easy awaiting a foul weather friend. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the three of you for the generosity of all that you've shared with us this evening. I really have enjoyed it quite a bit. And thank you all for attending. This will also be, it has been recorded and we will put it out on YouTube so others can share it as well. Really, thank you for coming. Enjoy your evening. Thanks, Amy. Bye, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for coming, Iris, from so far away.
It was surprisingly easy. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I'm glad it worked out.
Iris, it's Stephen Drew. Good to see you, dear.
Oh, hi. I didn't even see you there, Stephen. Hi. Wow.
What a small world we live in.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was just terrific. Goodbye,
I'm really
everyone.
glad. It's just about, it's just what I needed. I worked the polls yesterday and it was a very, very long day. So it was, you know, I needed to kind of fill up the jets again, you know, kind of recharge. And they're very generous to do this, but it was just lovely.
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Of course. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.